Springs, good to see you guys this morning. You guys take a seat. It really is funny coming in here on Sunday mornings because you guys just love your meet and greets so much more than the middle schoolers do. It is crazy. If we haven't gotten a chance to meet before, my name's Noah. I get to serve on staff here with the student ministry, and I love any chance I get to come out here and hang out with you guys on a Sunday. Thank you for being here. So over the past couple weeks, we have been in a series called Mind the Gap. We've been talking about the different generations over the past few hundreds of years. We've been talking about from the baby boomer silent generation to Gen Z, and potentially coming up, some of our sixth graders, Gen Alpha. I don't know if you knew that or not, but we've got the whole range of generations here at the Springs. But this week, we are focusing in and dialing in on Generation Z. And if you're wondering, who is Generation Z? Hi, my name's Noah. I am Generation Z. Good to meet you guys this morning, and I'm probably about to make a lot of you guys probably feel really old. I'm kind of sorry. I was born, everybody, let's do this real quick. Take a deep breath. I was born in 2000. Exhale. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Who let the child on stage is probably what you're wondering. No, but I am excited to come up here and talk about who is Gen Z, what are we all about, and how can you help us in the midst of this. And thinking about that, there's a story that came to mind, and it's called the Hebrides Revival. If you've never heard of that, you're not alone. I had never heard of that until John Omquist told me about it. So the Hebrides Revival is a few patches of islands off the coast of Scotland. And there are these two older women who were just beautiful saints who were living in the Hebrides Islands, and they were 84 years old and 82 years old. One of them was named Peggy. She was 84. The 82-year-old was named Christine. Now, Peggy, 84 years old, blind, can't see a thing. Christine, 82 years old, suffering from arthritis, can barely walk. And that's helpful context for what we're about to talk about. And so Christine and Peggy, they can't go to church anymore on Sunday mornings because they can't really leave their house. And Christine was helping Peggy, but she can't walk, so they just kind of sit in their house on Sunday mornings, and their little cottage became their meeting place for God. That became the place that they would go meet with God on Sunday mornings. And they felt this burden one Sunday morning as they were meeting with God, and it was this burden that there was no young people in their church. There was no young people in their little parish that they had. And so they thought about this, and they went, well, we should probably pray about that. That's probably a good thing, which that's not usually my first instinct, so I'm glad that that was their first instinct. But they start praying about it, and they start praying and asking God to send them young people. And one day, God sends this woman, Christine, a vision of this pastor that's supposed to come and lead this revival within the Hebrides Islands. And so she goes, great, I can't wait that he's going to come. Starts praying that he's going to come, and eventually this guy comes. His name is Davis Campbell. And Davis Campbell comes, and he starts preaching, and as he's preaching, he comes the first time. Not really a ton happens, and it's just kind of, it's there. Like there's no young people that come, nobody gets saved, no life change, just kind of like a normal Sunday afternoon sermon. Probably went and got brunch afterwards. Like nothing crazy happened. And they encouraged him. They said, no, come back. We think something's happening here. And so eventually he came back and he preached again. And after he preached, people got saved. Lives were changed. The Holy Spirit came and descended in that room. And young people started flooding in. There's even a story of there were people outside of the police station down the road who were weeping and just asking for somebody to pray for them. All because these two saints, Miss Peggy and Miss Christine, 84 years old and 82 years old, they knew that there was something wrong. They knew that it's weird that there's no young people here. We need to pray for that. We need to ask God to send us young people. And that heart for the lost, that heart for the young people of the next generation is exactly what we are talking about this morning. We're talking about how to reach Generation Z. And it's hard. It's not like teenagers are new. There's nothing new under the sun, like Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. Like, we still kind of don't really listen to our parents. We still kind of like, maybe you still don't really listen to your parents. I don't know what you do, but like it's just, there's this anti-authority. It's like they're kind of confusing. They're always on their phones. They complain a lot. They don't really work a ton. Always on TikTok. Always on TikTok. And so this younger generation is just kind of confusing. And I heard a parent say recently when talking about their son, they said, man, he's kind of like a Rubik's Cube. Clearly that connected with some of us, is that your son, your daughter, it's like, man, they're just kind of like a Rubik's Cube. Like, I don't know, how do I figure them out? I can barely figure out my own Rubik's Cube. And so that's what I'm hopefully here to help you with today. I don't know how helpful this will be, hopefully very, but figuring out how can we solve this Rubik's Cube of Generation Z. And the three things that we're going to go over is, okay, who is Gen Z? We've got to get context for who Gen Z is. And then the second piece, how does Gen Z view you? How does Gen Z view the older generations? And then lastly, can we help them? Are they beyond help? How can we help them? And so those are the three pieces that we're going to be looking at today. And we're going to start in Judges chapter 2, verses 11 through 17. If you've got your copy of the scriptures, don't worry, it will also be up on the screen. We're going to start in verse 11. And before we do that, a little bit of context is probably helpful with Judges. And so as we're jumping into Judges 2, this is a preview of the people of Israel and how they're about to act over the next few years. How are they going to react to God? Because what just happened was the people of Israel, they were in Egypt in slavery. God frees them from being slaves. Pretty cool that God frees them from being slaves. And then they go, man, we kind of want to go back to being slaves, God. And he goes, what? Anyways, so they go back and they say, God, we want to be slaves. He goes, no, I'm going to do all these cool things, and I'm going to bring you into this promised land, this land of milk and honey, overflowing with abundance and goodness, because I care about you and I want to take care of you. And so God brings his people out in 40 years of wilderness. He brings them out into this traveling desert. It's kind of chaotic, but it's also kind of fun. Moses is leading them. He does these cool miracles, splits the Red Sea in half, turns a staff into a snake. Like, crazy stuff happens. And then Moses dies. This guy named Joshua comes in. Joshua's their new leader. Joshua takes the people into this promised land. And then Joshua dies. And then after Joshua dies, it's kind of, like we just kind of float along. We're just kind of there, turning away from God, turning back to God. We realize we need God. God, I love you, but then I don't like you anymore. And then it's just this back and forth, and you just kind of ebb and flow between that cycle of sin in Judges. We go from, man, God, like I think I kind of want you. Oh, I really want you and need you. I don't know about this. And then it continues, and it continues, and it continues. And so that's where we're jumping in Judges chapter 2, verse 11 is giving us a broad overview of what this is going to look like, starting in verse 11. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight and served the images of Baal. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. And they went after other gods, worshiping gods of the people around them. And they angered the Lord. They abandoned the Lord to serve Baal and the images of Ashtoreth. They made the Lord burn with anger against Israel, so he handed them over to raiders who stole their possessions. He turned them over to their enemies all around, and they were no longer able to resist them. Every time Israel went out into battle, the Lord fought against them, causing them to be defeated just as he had warned. And the people were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges to rescue the Israelites from their attackers. Yes, thank you, God. Yet Israel did not listen to the judges, but prostituted themselves by worshiping other gods. How quickly they turned away from the path of their ancestors who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. And so that is the broad overview, which then leads us to Judges chapter 17, verse 6. After a lot of this has already happened, this is where we lead into in Judges chapter 17, verse 6. In those days, Israel had no king. They had no authority over them. They had rejected God as their king. They had no sense of what was true and what was right. They had no king, and all the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. And if that doesn't sound true for not just Generation Z, but the rest of the generations in the world that we're living in, I don't know another scripture that we could pick that would fit so well, because they did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. And so what we're talking about today is, how do you reach a lost generation? How do you reach a broken generation? Because nobody's sitting here going, man, that TikTok generation's rocking it right now. I'm not saying that. That's my own generation. And I'm kind of stubborn and defensive, but that's a whole other thing that we'll get into later. But Generation Z has a lot going on. So who is Generation Z? What do we know about Generation Z, and who are they? Oftentimes, for a lot of us, they are at our dinner table. And so even thinking about who Gen Z is, it's probably just good to look at me. I was born in 2000, and if you know anything about the year 2000, probably one thing that comes to mind is Y2K. I don't know what that is. I know it's weird. And they were like, maybe zombies or something going on with Y2K. So there was that. And then drastic, sharp right turn. One of the greatest tragedies in our country that ever happened was 9/11. And in 9/11, I was 1 year old. I don't have a framework for how bad 9/11 could have been other than my imagination. I can go to the museum, and it's probably super great and probably gives me great context for what happened during 9/11. I just don't know the impact of what 9/11 was. I don't know an airport without security. I don't know an airport without TSA. I got my first phone when I was in 6th grade. And we just got a, and I'm not talking about like a Motorola Razr flip phone. I did 100% play that bowling game on that phone, on my grandma's phone, but that was not my first phone. My first phone was an Android smartphone. My first phone was an Android smartphone. And before that, I had an iPod Touch, if you even know or remember what an iPod Touch was. That was my first exposure to technology in 4th grade. And just a little cherry on top, because I didn't grow up watching Michael Jordan play, I know that LeBron James is the best basketball player who's ever lived. But that's a conversation for another day. We don't have to talk about that right now. But that's who Gen Z is, and your first thought might be, man, they're the worst. Not really, but kind of at the same time. And so Gen Z has a lot going on, because in the midst of all of that, we've also grown up in an era of bad news, is probably a good way to say it. There's the cliche of you ever just turn on the TV and it's just bad news constantly. I don't think there's a website that you can have off the top of your head that you go, I go here for my good news of the day. No, we pull up our Apple News app and we go, oh man, another earthquake. Man, that natural storm looks really bad. Oh, there was another mass shooting. Oh, anxiety and depression's high again. It's always been high. And we just keep scrolling and scrolling, and we're taking in all of this bad news, and that's what Gen Z has grown up with. We grew up with COVID. We grew up being isolated in our houses for about a year and a half, maybe a year. We grew up texting our friends. We grew up not having a ton of face-to-face interaction. We grew up in the 2008 financial crisis and the financial problems that we're having now after COVID. We got both of those. And sure, we are 0% worried about our Roth 401k. We are 0% worried about the stock market, 0% worried about the housing market. All we know is that we hear our parents complaining about it, and then we're worried about whether or not we'll be able to afford something in the future. That's all we hear. We don't have a context for maybe it'll be okay. Gen Z assumes the worst because we've grown up hearing about everything bad. Because in a culture of bad news where it feels like a lot of us might take short breaths and we go, okay, bad news, but it's not that bad. Bad news, but context. It could be worse. Gen Z takes deep breaths of negativity. And that is what we have grown up with. That is what I've grown up with. And in fact, because of there's so many bad things, so many fears, Gen Z is a generation that just lives in fear. In fact, we came up with 3 new acronyms because we have so much fear. We have fear of missing out, FOMO, which I'm sure you might have heard of. We have FOBO, fancy, fear of a better option. And we have FOMU, fear of messing up. FOMO, FOBO, and FOMU, tongue twister. And all 3 of those things greatly impact Gen Z. They greatly impact me. Because if you imagine you grow up with technology, you get introduced to a smartphone, you get introduced to social media, Instagram, whatever your flavor is, TikTok, and you're constantly comparing yourself. You grew up comparing yourself. I don't know what it's like not to compare myself to other people because I've got this computer in my hand that just shows me other people who are better than me all the time. And so I'm afraid of the better options that are out there, and then I'm also afraid of missing out because I might see my friends post something that I want to go and do, but I didn't get invited, so that feels really weird. In fact, I don't know if they even like me, so now I'm afraid of missing out, and then I'm afraid of messing up because I see all these people who have so many better things than I do, and then I get stuck and I don't know what to do, so I just sit in my bed and scroll on TikTok. Gen Z has been discipled in technology. Gen Z has been discipled in technology. And even thinking about worries, fears, insecurities, how does all of this look? Thought of what's a good way to think about this. And so right here we've got a tennis ball. And with this tennis ball, this is going to represent anxieties, represent worries, represent concerns, whatever other thing you want to throw on there. This is what this tennis ball represents. And this is not meant to throw shots. This is not meant to take shots at any other generation or anybody, but thinking about, okay, Generation X, the older millennial generation, and baby boomers, what were pretty good worries that they had. And so thinking about, okay, what are worries that they had, you think about, okay, I got a test coming up. It's a pretty big deal. Got a test coming up. It's pretty important. School's important. Need to make sure I'm doing a good job with all of that. Man, I've got a baseball game coming up. Maybe I've got a tennis match coming up. Feels really good. It feels pretty important. A little anxious about that. Just want to make sure that I beat the other guy in front of me. But, I'll go home. It's not that big of a deal. Don't really have to compare myself to anybody around the world, but just need to beat the guy in front of me. That's great. I just need to beat that guy. Got a school test coming up. Math, not my strong suit, but, oh, man, geometry. Whew. Got that test coming up. Got to make sure I study for it. And it's getting kind of full. Like, you already kind of have a full load here. Man, did you see the way Becky looked at me earlier? I might have a date to the prom, baby. And so you think about that, and then you tack on one more thing. Hey, Mom, what's for dinner? Hey, Mom, do you know if Dad's coming home from dinner? Have you heard from Dad? I don't know if he's coming home or not for dinner. And so you tack on that on top of an already full plate, and this is what previous generations walked through. It's pretty full. Like, I'm having a hard time kind of carrying this, and I don't really know how many more I can carry. I might get a little bit overwhelmed, but you throw on top of that comparison with your friends on social media. Like, it's not just those around you, but you also look at 17-year-olds that are homeschooled that their parents let them travel the country, and you go, man, I kind of want to go and do that. Why won't my parents let me go and do that? Do my parents even like me? Which is silly, but then you also think about, dude, my friends are talking about this new Netflix show called Outer Banks. I haven't seen the new season, and oh man, I'm 6 episodes behind, and I got that new TV show on Amazon Prime that I want to watch. Dude, I got to catch up on that. I got to make sure that I'm watching that. And then you see another picture, and it's like, oh man, she posted a picture with him. I thought she was with me. I thought we were talking. I know we're not dating, but we're talking. Why is she posting a picture with him? Who is that guy? Why are they at the beach? What's going on over there? Man, everybody's over at a party. Why didn't I get an invite? Why did I get left out? Do they even like me? Do they care about me? Do they love me? Am I their friend? And you tack that on top of, man, an older generation's worried about school safety, but I practice lockdown drills every week. I practice lockdown drills every week. I see a school shooting on the news. Every single week, there's at least one. I don't know what to do with that. Man, I'm so anxious right now. I don't know what to do with that. So I just scroll on TikTok and social media, and my parents don't get it. They don't understand. My parents are always talking about this LGBTQ thing. I'm supposed to, I don't know, I can't affirm them, but I'm still supposed to love them. But I've got my best friend who just came out to me as pansexual, and she's pretty normal. Why can't I just accept her and love her? Man, I've been looking at porn since before puberty, and I just came across it on accident, and all I do is feel shame, and my parents tell me that I can't watch it, but I just want to keep watching it, and I don't know what to do right now, and everything feels overwhelming. And we're just left with this chaotic mess of anxiety and worry that just spills over, so it's no wonder that we're anxious. It's no wonder that we're depressed. It's no wonder that we feel so out of control and overwhelmed because we're carrying all this anxiety and worry, and we don't know what to do with it. Because Gen Z was given adult content with adolescent training. And when I say adult content, yes, I'm talking about pornography. Yes, I'm talking about the R-rated movies. Yes, I'm talking about all of that. But I'm also talking about when you turn on the news and it's always sad. I'm talking about when you scroll and you see hurt, you see pain. That's the full context of adult content that I'm talking about. But this adult content with adolescent training is what Gen Z has grown up with. And they're usually, I'm saying usually because there are some rock star parents in this room. There usually isn't anybody to help us with this. There's not anybody saying, oh yes, like that is bad. But also here's the contents, here's God's word, here's truth, here's what Jesus says. How does that make you feel? Most students just kind of see it happen and go, man, I don't know what to do with that. The average age of someone getting their first smartphone is 10. Also, the average age of somebody first being exposed to pornography is 10. This generation did not have training wheels. Just kind of got handed an iPhone and said, hope it works out. And it just didn't go well. As we see, this social experiment isn't working. Gen Z is anxious. Gen Z is depressed. Gen Z is frantic. They're overwhelmed. And even to some extent, they do kind of inflict it upon themselves. Gen Z doesn't ask for help, but we also didn't have to grow up asking for help because we had Google. But then Google doesn't always give us the right answers, so then we get stuck in this vortex, and it's just this spinning circle. If you've ever been in a kayak and you just kind of go on one side, just kind of go in a circle. And if you ever see somebody doing that, I hope you don't, but if you ever see somebody doing that, you go, that's dumb, why are they going in a circle? But what if you don't know you're going in a circle? What if you don't know that the circle isn't how it's supposed to be? What if you don't know that dysfunction isn't normal? Because for Gen Z, dysfunction is normalized. Dysfunction, not transformation, has been normalized in our generation. And that's scary. That should be terrifying to hear that. We shouldn't go, oh man, that's kind of a bummer. Like we should be frightened to hear that dysfunction has become normal. But also not shocked at the same time, because as Christians, as followers of Jesus, sin, brokenness, we should expect that. But dysfunction being normalized is not okay. There is a good side of this with Gen Z. They are one of the most open, vulnerable, and, throw this word on, accepting generations that has been around, because they look at all of everything that's been happening. And with the invention of social media, this adds a new flavor. On TikTok, vulnerability and acceptance, that's normal. Sure, we can experience that before, but you see it on a worldwide scale within TikTok, Instagram, social media. And so with Gen Z, the bad part about this, yes, Gen Z has a great theology of brokenness. Gen Z has a terrible theology of transformation and healing. For Gen Z, healing looks like you bring it out into the open and you talk about it. You bring things out into the light. When you bring it out into the light, it's no longer in darkness, Ephesians 5. But you bring it out into the light and it just kind of sits there. And as it sits there, it grows, and then you see the problem and you think about the problem, and then you grow on the problem, and then you meditate on the problem, and then the problem grows roots, and then the problem grows fruit. And then you become the problem. And with Gen Z, a good thing too is that wherever you land on this spectrum is that medication for Gen Z no longer has a social stigma. Counseling for Gen Z no longer has a social stigma. But in the midst of that, it's just kind of there. Like there's no forward progress for Gen Z. You just kind of talk about your issues and just laugh about it because you don't know what else to do. Like I have friends who just talk about their problems and talk about their issues that they've got going on in Generation Z, and it's just kind of like, everyone's anxious, what a bummer. Everyone's sad, me too. You're on Zoloft, I'm on Wellbutrin. You just kind of, all of that, which even 50 years ago, That's not normal, but dysfunction has become normalized within Gen Z. And you might hear all of that and go, man, yes, but Gen Z is kind of fragile. You would be correct. Gen Z is kind of fragile. So who is Gen Z? Kind of fragile. But also, what if we're fragile because nobody ever showed us how to be resilient? What if we are so fragile and we're not emotionally resilient because nobody ever took us by the hand and showed us what that meant? And so as we think about, okay, if nobody ever showed them how to do it, or maybe if I tried, how do they view me, the person who's supposed to be helping them? So how does Gen Z view you? So who is Gen Z? Kind of fragile, but also deeply passionate. So how does Gen Z, this fragile, deeply passionate generation, view you? How does Gen Z view me, the older side of Gen Z? Gen Z views you, apologies in advance, with cynicism and skepticism, because that's all that we've grown up with. And so diving back into the text in Judges chapter 2, verse 17, yet Israel did not listen to the judges, but prostituted themselves by worshiping other gods. How quickly they turned away from the path of their ancestors who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. And that last verse, part of the verse is what we're going to sit on. How quickly they turned away from the path of their ancestors who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. How quickly the last two generations, millennials, Gen Z, turned. How quickly they turned from the church. How quickly they turned from the Lord. Because the people of Israel went after other gods. They just were like, oh, great, let's go after other gods. But that doesn't happen out of the blue. See, there has to be a seed of doubt or a seed of distrust. And that seed starts to grow. You start to ask questions behind that seed. You start to ask questions behind that doubt. Is God really good? Did God really say that? Are you sure that God is for you? And then it starts to grow and grow and grow. With Gen Z, we have seen proverbially behind the curtain. We've seen behind the curtain, and it's messy. It's messy behind the curtain. It's also messy behind our curtain. With Gen Z, we've grown up in a society that lacks deep truth. Behind this curtain, we see that everybody thinks that they're right, and nobody wants to listen to anybody else. So why should we do the same? We've grown up in a world that idealizes two values: postmodernism and expressive individualism. Postmodernism, there's no absolute truth. We've got facts, and then on equal footing, we've got alternative facts. We didn't invent that. We grew up with that. But then we've also got expressive individualism. You are your thoughts and feelings. You define your truth. So if we've got no absolute truth with postmodernism, and then if we've got you are your truth, your thoughts and feelings are your truth with expressive individualism, mesh those two together, you get a generation that thinks they know what's going on, and they're entitled, and they're slightly arrogant, and they don't really work super hard, and they think they get everything that they deserve. And that's what you get when you mesh those two things together. Because we also grew up hearing about everybody's failures. Like we grew up with this, I am the person who can rely on me, and then I see everybody's failures. I for sure can't rely on them. I know that I'm the only person who can push this through. And in the church, it's so much worse. In the church, the volume gets turned up to the max. Because in the church, spiritual hypocrisy is no longer kept within four walls. Spiritual hypocrisy is all over social media. We see pastors that have a moral failing every other week, potentially. We see pastors pretty constantly on the news. This one, got another one, there goes another one. And we see it constantly. So if we think and we go, man, the church is supposed to be the place where that's where all the good people go, which we all know, we're in this building, we know that the church is not the good people. We are imperfect people trying to follow Jesus. But Gen Z has this perspective of, if they're not doing it, I'm for sure not doing it. I'm cool with Jesus. I'm cool. He's like a good teacher. He cares about social justice. I care about social justice. But Christianity, Christians, I'm good. Like that's some baggage that I don't want. I'm good with Jesus. I'm not good with that. Because the people who represent Jesus, I don't know how I feel about them. Gen Z doesn't trust anyone, not even older generations. The only people that Gen Z trusts are our peers, which that is a scary place to be. Because you're all figuring out life on your own, and you're not sure what the next turn that life is going to give you, and you don't have guidance from older generations. That's a scary place to be. See, Gen Z, when we think of authority and we think of trust and we give it a grade, we start with an F, and you have to earn an A. Like, we don't immediately start with an A. We don't start with, you are trustworthy. I trust you. You're in a position of authority. I feel like I can put some trust in your hand. You seem like you're trustworthy. No. We start with an F, and you have to earn that A. And you got to prove that you earned that A. Whereas for older generations, for a lot of us, we start with an A. And it's like, man, I seem like a good guy. I think I can trust you. And then if you mess up, it's like, knock you down to a C, but you're still passing. Just kind of got a few things to work out on along the way. Then if you really mess up, then you move down to an F. And you got to earn your way back up to the A. Gen Z never started with the A to begin with. Gen Z has always started with an F. And even thinking about, okay, is there something that's been like this in my life? There was a pastor at a church that I was a part of a few years ago, and he was somebody that I looked up to. I wasn't super close with him, but he was somebody that I looked up to, and always had some kind of mistrust there, but I always just kind of thought that was me and my generational baggage that I have. And so I looked up to him and thought he was doing great, and then come to find out he was cheating on his wife. Pastor at a church was cheating on his wife, and he's got kids, and not just like a couple of kids, he's got a lot of kids, and he's still married and his wife, and they found reconciliation, but that hit me. It didn't hit me as hard as it hit some of my other friends, but that impacted me. That there was somebody who I looked up to that had a moral failing, and I'm sure a lot of us here in this room have something like that to some extent. Maybe you've got divorced parents. Maybe you've got abuse in your past. Maybe you've got somebody that you really looked up to that fell. Maybe you've got something that you've done that you're ashamed of. Whatever that is that's coming to mind, Generation Z is not alone in that. But we don't know that we're not alone in that. We don't know. We just kind of think and look up to older generations and go, like they don't get it. They haven't walked through what I've walked through. And that's a classic teenager, young adult response. They don't get it. They haven't walked through what I've walked through. They don't understand. And if you don't understand, come ask us. Come ask us. Come show us that you care. And we'll talk more about what that looks like a little bit later. But thinking about come ask us, come care about us. Gen Z needs help. We need your help. We don't know how to navigate this world. There's a quote from David Kinnaman. He did a project called The Open Generation. He works for a group called Barna. And he says, having a spiritual mentor is one of the strongest factors for helping young people develop a resilient faith, one that grows and sustains them over time and helps guide them toward meaning and purpose in life. And there was a study that was done by a group called Mentors, and it says this, is that mentors greatly alter the trajectory of this generation. They are 55% less likely to skip school. Sounds pretty good. They're 78% more likely to volunteer in communities. They are 130% more than double to hold leadership positions. And 82% of teachers said academic outcomes went up. all because of a mentor. But the mentor wasn't asking them or tutoring them in anything in school-specific subjects. They just asked them how they were doing. And because they asked them how they were doing, their academic performance went up. Because they knew that this isn't just for me. I know that I got to go tell my mentor about what's going on, and not even in a condemning and a accusatory way, but no, he actually wants to know about what's going on, and he cares about me succeeding. Mentors greatly impact the next generation. And so Gen Z, we don't need information help. We've got Google. We've also got AI. If you ever use ChatGPT, it's great. ChatGPT, whatever it is, it's great. Clearly, I've used it like once. But we've got even AI coming up in the next year. These tools that we have at our fingertips, information is not the problem. We need interpretation. Would you help us interpret the information that we've been gifted? We need people to speak belief into us because we all need people to speak belief into us. And here's the cool part as we're talking about this, as we're moving into this next piece. How can you help? How can we help? If you want to help, God will send you. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. If you want to help, God will send you and he will use you. And you can be a Peggy. You can be a Christine. You can pray for this next generation. You can ask God to use you in this next generation if you want to help. And so the last piece, can we help them? In Judges 2:17, they have turned from the ways of their ancestors. Can we help Gen Z? Yes, but we have to reframe our understanding of who they are. We have to reframe our understanding of who they are and what they're walking through. Because do they do it to themselves? Kinda, yes. But also, we don't know what to do with what we have. We need you to help us. We need you to understand us through relationships, but not actually like get our culture. We don't really need you to understand what mid means, what cap means, what Riz means, what gas means, which a lot of us here are going, I thought I was catching on to dope. There's more. Don't worry about it. We don't need you guys to understand what our slang and our culture is, but would you be interested in us? That's the invitation. Would you be interested in who we are, what we're learning? We need you to love us. And this word gets a little bit of flack, but we need you to love us and accept us. But within acceptance and within love, a welcoming invitation for rebuke, a welcoming invitation for correction. But there has to be enough relational equity for you to say that. And you might make them upset. Correction, you will make them upset. Very stubborn. But it's worth it. And instead of thinking that you are giving tough love, maybe think, is this contempt or is this tough love? Because Generation Z needs tough love. We need somebody to tell us, you're being dumb. I need somebody to tell me that. Out of love, not out of contempt. If I ever feel, and this is my own baggage, welcome to my counseling session. If I ever feel that I'm being belittled, I'll shut down really quick. And that's not just a Generation Z thing. I know a lot of us in this room feel that. But Generation Z feels that acutely. And another piece, the last piece of this, reframing our attention seeking as maybe we're lost for direction. Maybe we're not just seeking for attention for the sake of notice me, notice me, notice me. Maybe we're lost for direction because we don't know that there's a God in heaven who loves us, cares about us, and wants to have a relationship with us. Maybe we don't know that. Maybe nobody's ever taught us that. We need to form Gen Z's thinking, not tell them what to think. Do's and don'ts are helpful, but what's the why that's fueling the do's and the don'ts? If there's no why, if there's no motive, you back off whenever you leave your parents. That's why the younger generation is leaving the church. There's been no formation. There's been information. Information is helpful, but formation, that will carry you. And that is both the most frustrating part about Gen Z and the most beautiful part, is that we ask really good questions. I think we ask great questions, but also frustrating to an extent of why can't you just stop asking questions and questioning everything? It's going to be fine, don't worry about it. But we really care about the foundation. What is being built up from this foundation? And how can you, as parents, as spiritual fathers and mothers, help us build this foundation? Because within Gen Z and in this world today, there is so much gray area. There's so much nuance. And maybe 50 years ago, we were good with red and blue. But Gen Z likes purple. They like maybe a lighter shade of purple, maybe a darker shade of purple. It's a spectrum. Gen Z really loves to not be fit and put into a box. And this is not a political statement. Hear me say this before I say what I'm about to say. This is not a political statement. But thinking about Generation Z and gun control, that's a really big, important thing for Generation Z. Because we've grown up with school shootings. We've grown up running lockdown drills. Maybe not once a week, for sure a lot. We've grown up with more mass shootings in a year than days in a year. Over 40,000 students were impacted by a school shooting just in last year. 40,000. And that is not a political statement where I am up here saying, as Generation Z representative, we need gun control. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that because of those stats, Gen Z takes that and goes, guns aren't good. There's no way that guns can be used for good. My friends are dying. And maybe not my actual friends, but maybe a few, like even with the school shooting in Nashville that happened recently, there were probably a few random connections to different people that a few of us might have in this room that we're weirdly connected to that. Like it's not just a isolated incident, it impacts everybody. So Gen Z hears that and goes, guns are bad, get rid of guns. Because we want to flip the institution. But what if you believe and you're in this room that guns are helpful and that guns are beneficial and that it's not the gun that kills people, it's the person? How can you form thinking in a younger generation to help them see where you are coming from? Because our context, school shootings, guns, bad. That's our simple formation. So we need help to think about things differently. We need context. And the biggest thing, and I'll land here, the biggest thing that Gen Z needs is you. We need you, church. We need you to come and help us navigate everything that we are feeling, thinking, running through, and everything. And not only do we need you to show us Jesus. Because we don't know what Jesus looks like outside of this negative news and this negative interpretation. We need you to help us show us the person of Jesus, because the person of Jesus is so compelling. He's so compelling. Over 50% of Gen Z teenagers are very interested in learning about who Jesus is. Over 50%. I hope that's a mindset switch for you, of hearing that and going, I thought they were out on Jesus. No, Gen Z is so wildly interested in the person of Jesus. Show us Jesus. This man, this perfect man who came and lived this life on earth because he saw us and he said, they need help. I need to go help them. So Jesus came down and he lived this life for 33 years perfect to then die on a cross for our sin. Sin is the thing that separates us from God. and then he beat death 3 days later to prove that he has power over death and sin, because the person of Jesus is compelling, church. How can you show us the person of Jesus? And Gen Z, don't be difficult. Don't be difficult. It says in 2 Timothy 2:2, Paul's writing to his son. I'm going to call him his son, Timothy. He's not actually his son, he's his spiritual son. But as Paul is writing this letter to Timothy, he calls him his spiritual son. Church, who are we spiritually fathering or spiritually mothering? That is the takeaway, the application for today. Who are we spiritually fathering or mothering? It might be your own kids. They might be a handful. I work in student ministry. I know some of your students. Kind of a handful, but love them. Maybe it's your own kids, and you go, that is my plate. That is what I feel like the Lord has called me to right now. You rock that and you knock that out of the park. Every week, we are sending discussion questions and conversation starters after the sermon on Sunday to help you have a conversation with your students about either what they thought, what they think, what they feel. If you have a hard time figuring out that Rubik's Cube, come let us know. We would love to throw your email on that list. And maybe for some of us, we're the Peggys and the Christines. Maybe for some of us, we've got kids, but we've got a little bit more margin. Maybe for some of us, we are young adults, young marrieds, young singles. We've got a lot of margin. Maybe for some of us, we're empty nesters, and we've got a lot of margin. How are we growing the next generation? If you want to come get involved with students, come let me know. Just a little plug there. But seriously, how are you getting involved with the next generation? How are you loving your grandsons and granddaughters? Have you asked them how they feel about Jesus? And if not, have you just asked them how they're doing? How are you praying for? Peggy and Christine, they did nothing but pray. And even saying that, it's not nothing. Prayer is everything. Prayer is a way of life. Prayer is how you talk to your neighbor. Prayer is how you talk to God. Prayer is how you communicate. How are you advancing the kingdom through the next generation? Let me pray. Jesus, we love you. We really do love you. And Jesus, I know, I'll say this for me, God, you are so compelling. Jesus, you are so kind. You are so loving. You call us significant even though we might not think that we are. Jesus, you come in the midst of our sin, in the midst of our brokenness, in the midst of our pain, and you say, I see you. I notice you. You're not forgotten. You're not lost. Jesus, that is my prayer for this generation, that we would not be a generation that is lost. Would we not be a generation that forgets you? But Holy Spirit, would you save a fragment of this generation? Would there be a remnant? And God, would you grow that remnant? Would we invest in the remnant? And would we go find those who are lost? We love you, God. Amen.